Dear friends and colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am so glad that you have decided to join us for International Law Weekend 2020 and our 99th members meeting. ILW is organized every year by the American branch of the International Law Association, affectionately known as ABILA. It takes place at the same time as ABILA's annual members meeting, and this year, because of the pandemic, we are pleased to offer it on a virtual platform created and managed by Arbitration Place, which has allowed individuals from over 40 countries to be present. Your registration grants you access to a wide range of panel discussions, plenary sessions, keynote addresses, and networking opportunities, as well as recordings of the program following the meeting. This year's meeting includes 27 panels covering a wide array of public and private international law topics and featuring speakers from around the world. We have more than 1,800 participants registered, including academics, diplomats, government officials, NGO leaders, students, and business leaders. Immediately following this welcome message, the conference will open with a plenary panel featuring Professor Gian, Luca, Burci, Sylvia, Fernandez, and Ambassador David Sheffer, discussing our theme of international law in challenging times. The plenary session will be followed by a series of wonderful panel discussions and close today with networking sessions hosted by several ABILA committees and our Women and International Law Community Group, co-sponsored by WILIG of the American Society of International Law. Tomorrow's keynote address will be delivered by Catherine Amafar, a partner at Debevoise & Plimpton, LLP, a great supporter of ABILA and the current president of the American Society of International Law. Friday will also be full of many wonderful panels, as well as networking sessions hosted by our committees and community groups at lunch and following the panels, and then capped off at the end of the day with our inaugural International Law Trivia Night, hosted by ABILA Vice President Dean Michael Sharp of Case Western Law School, and co-hosted by Madeline George, ILW Program Officer. On Saturday morning, we begin the day with an address from Judge Julia Sebutindi of the International Court of Justice, marking the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the UN Charter's entry into force, followed by a plenary session on the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, featuring Ambassador Christian Benevaser, former Assistant Secretary General for Legal Affairs Larry Johnson, and two members of the UN International Law Commission, Charles Jallo and Patricia Galvayo-Teresh. Our 99th members meeting will follow. Non-members can attend, but only members can vote. Our Book of the Year and Distinguished Service Awards will be awarded at that time. And Saturday will also feature many fine panel discussions, as well as a special careers panel and networking session, especially for law students, sponsored and organized by the International Law Students Association. We are so grateful to all of our sponsors for supporting ILW and ABILA, with special thanks to Arbitration Place, our virtual host, and the law firms of White & Case and Debevoise & Plimpton. We always keep the weekend available at very, very low cost, and it's always free for students. We can't do it without your generous support. I'd now like to thank especially the members of the organizing committee, co-chaired by, hang on one second, Yvonne Dutton, Chiara Giorgetti, and Tej Srimnushnam, who did an amazing job when we had to pivot some months ago due to the pandemic. And I'd also like to thank the members of the organizing committee, in addition to our co-chairs, who lent their time and considerable talent to bringing you this year's program. William Acevas, Pam Bookman, Kristen Boone, Amity Boy, Imad Khan, David Nanopoulos, Victoria Sahani, Nawi Ukabyala, David Stewart, the chair of ABILA's board of directors, and Isabella Vasila Georgi. And last but certainly not least, our 7 student ambassadors from Cardozo Law School, Pitt Law School, and Washington University in St. Louis, pictured here with some members of the organizing committee, and our amazing administrative team, Tabitha Crawford, our membership officer, Zoe Ferguson, our media and ILW administrative officer, and Madeline George, ILW program officer. Friends, these are indeed challenging times for the international legal order. for institutions, for commerce, for the rule of law, and for the protection of human rights and the environment. And yet the creativity of individuals and institutions in meeting these challenges is evidenced every day. At meetings like this, we have the opportunity to come together, discuss, and create new ways of addressing the current challenges to international law and developing international legal norms and institutions to meet the very real needs of the modern world. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And please do, if you haven't already done so, join the International Law Association American branch and become part of a global organization with more than 4,600 members and 63 branches worldwide. Our American branch offers opportunities to connect with your fellow international lawyers, not just in the US, but around the world, and work together on projects of common interest. ILW committee reports are in and of themselves often considered a subsidiary source of international law, and the collegiality and small size of the branch allows individuals to connect with fellow members and build lifelong friendships. Next year, the pandemic willing, we hope to once more be in our usual location for ILW 2021 at Fordham Law School when we kick off our centennial year. Meanwhile, please enjoy this year's ILW 2020. We look forward to seeing you here and at our future events. Thank you for your kind attention. And now there'll be a short pause while our opening plenary panel will convene. So I'd now like to open the weekend with our President's Opening Plenary Panel, International Law in Challenging Times. And indeed, these are challenging times. I will give a brief introduction of the panelists who you see before you on your screen, and then pose a series of questions to them, allowing them to weigh in on their thoughts about what international law and institutions need to do to adapt and thrive in this difficult environment. First, we have Professor Gian Burci, who's an adjunct professor at international law, an academic advisor at the Global Health Center, and the director of the Joint LLM and Global Health Law and Governance at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva, Switzerland. Professor Burci also served as the legal counsel to the WHO from 2005 to 2016, and prior to that worked in the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Office of the UN Legal Counsel. Next, we have Judge Sylvia Fernandez, former judge and president of the International Criminal Court until 2018. She is currently the ambassador of Argentina to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and chair-elect of the Global Action for the Prevention of Mass Atrocities, as well as the president of the Latin American Society of International Law. Next, we have Ambassador and Professor David Sheffer, who was the first U.S. ambassador at large for war crimes issues during the Clinton administration and deeply involved in the creation of 5 war crimes tribunals, including the International Criminal Court. As head of the U.S. negotiating delegation, he signed the Rome Statute for the United States of America. He was also the UN Secretary General's special expert on UN assistance to the Khmer Rouge trials from 2012 to 2018. Ambassador Sheffer is clinical professor emeritus at Northwestern University Pritzker School of Law. His most recent book is The Sit Room in the Theater of War and Peace, about National Security Council decision-making during the Balkans War of the early 1990s, while he was on the Deputies Committee of the NSC. I've asked the panelists to each spend a few minutes at the outside addressing the theme of the weekend. How essentially, if international institutions and international coordination are going to be paramount in solving global problems like the coronavirus pandemic or climate change, how can they become more successful in doing so? And so our first speaker on this topic is Professor Burci. Gian, Luca, you have the floor. And if we can all mute ourselves when we're not speaking, that'll probably help, especially if my children happen to wander into the room.
Many thanks, Leila. Many thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I attended many international law weekends when I was in New York, and I have a very fond memories. I see in the participants also many people I know, so it's really quite a welcome opportunity. I apologize for wearing this. I know I look like a flight controller, but the audio on my computer doesn't work otherwise. So you asked quite a big question, and uh, in my view, and that's a more or less bit of an impressionistic answer. There are ambivalent signals. The situation to me is quite a bit confusing and ambivalent. Because on the one hand, we have the wave of nationalistic leaders that we all know about, with a almost like knee-jerk mistrust of multilateralism, strong assertions of sovereignty, of recall, like a popular sovereignty in the old-style sense, and frontal attack against multilateral institutions. The first months of the COVID crisis saw this very sort of unilateral, knee-jerk, close your door kind of approach that in a way defied rationality, but maybe not politically. So we have, in a way, certainly not a positive image that comes out of the last few months. At the same time, we also have the opposite, because at times of crisis, I think maybe a knee-jerk reaction is close your door and don't let anybody in, but it's also to look for a guide, to look for somebody that can help. And to me, WHO has shown that there is at the same time that almost an abandonment, a rejection of a coordinated multilateral approach. There is also a strong urge to use multilateral institutions. I think WHO has shown, with all the mistakes that it may have done, the importance of multilateral coordination and leadership. What you have seen in the last few weeks in terms of this coordinated approach to search for a new vaccine, for therapeutics, and also to anticipate how to allocate them equitably. It's a fascinating governance experiment that is happening almost spontaneously, but it's all centering around WHO, that has provided a platform, but also the authority to coordinate and to set principle for what we hope will be a rational approach to if and when we have the famous vaccine. So in a way, we have, I think, a bit of a mixed messages, mixed image. On the negative side, I would also put the lack of UN leadership. I mean, Security Council was more or less paralyzed for months. It adopted the first kind of lukewarm resolution on COVID and international peace and security only in July. It didn't meet for the whole month of April. Hostage to sort of this bilateral rivalry between the US and China, and to other problems that have nothing to do with the substance of the crisis that we are facing. So again, I would say a mixed picture, but at the same time, I would accentuate the optimistic side. Besides WHO, think just of the fact the World Food Programme has just won the Nobel Prize for Peace. That to me is a huge recognition. The fact that UNHCR, IOM are very active, really providing basic humanitarian aid to the real victim of the current situation and keeping the attention on the real victim. And I would say successfully so by and large. Think of the European Union also, with all its internal contradiction, with all the agony of Brexit. It is keeping, should keep European economies afloat with a stimulus package. So there is an added value, and I think a recognition and a perception of this added value in a multilateral approach to something as turbulent as COVID can be. You mentioned coordination, and that's to me another thing that has been missing in these last few months, or at least has not been strong enough. Because to me, the the novelty of COVID, unlike the health crisis of the last 10, 15 years, it's not something short-lived or a moment of panic, but then the situation turns out to be milder than we feared. This is a very grave health crisis of a long duration. So the international community, I don't think it has the institutional and legal tools to endure and to manage in a rational way something which is so acute, so pervasive, and so long in time. So there is, in my view, and I wrote about it and I really feel strongly about it, there is a need for that kind of strategic leadership at a national level that can push for an institutional space, literally, or more than one institutional space, for countries to come together and try to consult, compare their own risk perception, coordinate what they do, because otherwise we see more of what we are seeing now. Popular rebellions against masks, this fake dilemma of health or economics, and that's exactly what we don't need at this time. So that's, in my view, it's a gap in multilateralism, but crises are opportunities. And I hope that it will be the kind of mature leadership that will work in this direction. We have models. Health offer one model, UNAIDS, for example, that was born precisely of this need to coordinate the complex response to such a complex disease. So we have models on which we can build that kind of institutional space that, in my view, would also prop up multilateralism, show the positive side of multilateral approach to a crisis like COVID.
Thank you so much. So much to think about there, right? As Gordon Rose wrote in Foreign Affairs, it's not connection that's killing us, it's connection without cooperation, right? That's really the issue. And I invite, by the way, all of our participants, if you have questions for the panelists, please do feel free to use the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and you can also speak with each other. Next, I'd like to turn to Judge Fernandez to sort of answer the same question, if you like. Judge, you have the floor. So to speak, the floor.
Thank you very much. I am really honored to be part of this opening plenary panel of this fabulous weekend. So thank you very much for this invitation to be part of this great event. I would like to add and echo some of the concepts that have been mentioned now by Professor Burci. Indeed, as you have said yourself, Leila, global problems indeed require global responses, which in turn require coordinated action. Now, your question, how to enhance this coordination and how to enhance support for the institutions. Now, I think that in order to enhance coordination and enhance support, I would like to stress 3 points. One that has already been mentioned by Professor Burci is leadership. The second one I will talk about is the need for an inclusive dialogue. And the third one I would like to focus on is the need for some reform of certain institutions. Now, in terms of leadership, coordination requires some kind of leadership. Leadership by a state or a group of states or an alliance of states or by an institution with sufficient legitimacy and expertise, credible expertise to lead the way. Now, what we have seen in this pandemic, it is this weakening of leadership. But the weakening of leadership predates the pandemic. And is part of the problems that we see now in our international legal order, international system. Because, well, we may go back to this, but there have been some changes in the power structure of the international system. And there are also some developments of national systems that have weakened this leadership of the legal order, of the legal system. So that is a problem, and I think we need to come back to this. I hope we have the time during this panel. But of course, because of this, we will need to look into new innovative ways in order to adapt to this power shift and these developments, because they are there to stay. They will not go away after the pandemic, I don't think so. And some of these changes may even threaten some of the values underpinning the legal order. So we need to look into this and see how we can adapt. As I said, we also need to look into who are the actors that we need to engage, because we have a diversified society. So it's not just about coordination among states, but coordination among all relevant actors. And that includes states, but also non-state actors, the private sector, even technological companies, NGOs, IGOs, institutions, and of course, coordination is done through multilateralism. But we need to really perceive multilateralism not so much about coordination among actors, but really coordination about all of them in systems that together enhance or may enhance the global compact. And we need these systems, whether you want to have appropriate answers in public health, climate change, food security, cybersecurity, or justice. And I maybe would like to go back to this as well at some point. So we need this inclusive approach, which is necessary for global responses to all these issues. And third and last, my third point is that also, and I have stressed this in relation to the ICC, but I think it applies to all institutions, support for institutions is linked also to their performance. Many consider that international institutions and their bureaucracies are underachieving, or even worse, that they are indeed an obstacle to achieve policy goals. So if institutions are not up to the task, if they do not deliver sufficiently in accordance with their respective mandates, they will lose credibility, relevance, and legitimacy, and hence support. So in order to obtain more support, it is essential for them to improve their outputs. That brings the issue of reform, which is so very difficult to achieve in international institutions. For various reasons, institutional inertia, vested interests of states and nationals within the institutions. So reforms are very difficult, but they are essential. Also to deprive populists and demagogues of one excuse, because it's far too easy to demonize multilateral institutions as being too inefficient to satisfy the needs of the real people in the real world. So we need leadership, we need inclusion, inclusive dialogue, and we need reform. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a super helpful framework, I think, for our conversation today, and adds a lot. I noticed there are several questions in the chat. The panelists are free, of course, to respond live in the chat to any of the questions, although I think some of them are going to relate to our next questions, which are specifically on the International Criminal Court and on the WHO. But before turning to that, Ambassador Sheffer, you have the floor. Thank you. David, you're muted. This was the first thing I learned as a professor teaching on Zoom.
There we go. I was told to mute, and now I must unmute. But I just want to embrace so much of what Luca and Sylvia have expressed here. They've really laid out some very, very clear markers about what the problems are and what some of the solutions may be in the future. I've been involved in many international law weekends and have enjoyed them tremendously. I must say I regret not having a whole body of particularly law students sitting in front of me, because I love the eye contact, I love the question and answer, I love the hallway discussions, and I am so sorry that we cannot do that, but perhaps next year we can achieve that again. I want to, because we have, I know a lot of students in the audience, I just want to give a slight historical perspective of how I view what is happening to international organizations and multilateralism. If you look back at the last 100 years, you can sort of divide the timeline up into the age of alliances, into the age of collectivism, the age of multilateralism, the age of the superpowers during the Cold War, and then the age of nationalism and isolationism, which we've been experiencing in recent years. And I would hope that what we could establish is a new age and move beyond that. And I would call it the age of collaboration. Other words have been used. Sylvia talked about cooperation, and Luca also spoke to this issue. But, you know, we have spent so much of our lives, those of us who are old, talking about changing the world. I mean, these have been huge themes at so many times in our professional life, that you've got to do something to change X or to change Y, whether it be poverty or climate change or food shortages, or just the way in which meetings take place, et cetera, among diplomats and countries, and how to solve problems. And I've been on so many of those discussions and book writing exercises. You know, here is a plan to change the world for the better. Now, that's still all very important, but I would say we have truly reached a stage, and COVID-19 brought us to the tipping point. Climate change did too, but we really have been hit hard to realize this. We now have to save the world. It's not just tinkering around to change this or that. It is a mega challenge that has to be seen through the prism of saving the world. And that's what I think is the great challenge, particularly of the younger generations, that they put themselves in that mindset that if you tinker to change one thing, you may not be saving the world by doing it. You need to have a holistic view of how to save the world. Now that brings me back to, of course, international organizations and institutions, which is our subject here. And I have a few ideas. Because I've worked within international organizations, within national governments, and so here is my perspective. I think it's imperative that international organizations, from the United Nations through its specialized agencies and through so many other multilateral, multinational organizations and regional organizations throughout the world, they attract, in a sense, some of the best and the brightest. They really do. They attract brilliant individuals to work within these organizations. These are exclusive jobs. Many of you will want to achieve participation through employment with international organizations. But my experience is that there tends to be sort of an elitist attitude that emerges within the staffing of these organizations. They know that they have virtuous objectives through the work of the organization that help millions of people. But at the same time, they develop a culture, I think, within the organization of some degree of elitism. And then that means the elites are talking to the elites. And they lose sight of the vast multitude that need them to communicate effectively with them and to listen to them effectively for their needs. Now, I know these are very general statements, but this is a very short discussion. And so therefore, what I want to say is, I think there has to be a rethink on how social media is used to connect international organizations far, far more effectively with the mass public, with the average citizen of each country. That is not happening. And someone needs to sit down and figure out how to do it, because they're all connecting to the social media, or at least more or less they're connecting. And we need to reach them with the message and the work and the values that are exemplified in international organizations. We also need to reach the cable media networks far more effectively so that they cover the work of international organizations. I'll bet you most Americans have no idea what the World Food Program does every day, and that the United States is the largest funder of the World Food Program. I'll bet you almost no one knows that. So that's a failure of communication to the average American of the worth of that UN specialized agency. The other thing is, we not only need to ditch the notion and you all know this from the American perspective, this heralding of exceptionalism. This was done during the Obama administration, that we were somehow the exceptional nation. And of course, under Trump, it's expressed in a somewhat different way, but it's still there very prominently. It's a very destructive theory because it runs against cooperation. It runs against multilateralism. It runs against what I would like to see, which is collaboration. And so I translate that to international organizations. And in a sense, we have to be careful even within IOs, that there is not a sense of exceptionalism, that somehow we are the only ones who know how to do this and we elites are going to talk to each other about it and your views don't really matter and we're at the top of the hill and we don't need to coordinate. That has to also be challenged. The exceptionalism of international organizations has to be challenged. Let me finally conclude with 2 points. One, we still live, as John Luca emphasized, in a world of sovereign nation states who all have very strong points of view. And of course, it is sovereign nation states and their governments which in the end more or less guide and control the international organizations given their priorities and their voting and their financial contributions, etc. So this really does come down once again to a mindset shift that needs to take place within national governments, within the foreign ministries, within the trade ministries, within the health ministries, about the value of international organizations, not to pitch your sovereign flag and protect only your own people, but frankly to join the common global effort to frankly save the world. And that brings me finally to what I would hope could happen, perhaps maybe next year under different circumstances that may develop very quickly, who knows, that I would love to see the heads of the major international organizations all the way, from the United Nations, the specialized agencies, the regional organizations. I mean, there's a lot of them. We'd have to figure that out. But I would love to get, I would love to see called, I'd like to see a powerful nation lead it to create something that I would call the Survival Summit. And at that summit, I would sit the heads of the international organizations with the G20 governments. I mean, to try to keep it manageable. And then we could, bring in other countries at other stages of the Survival Summit, but at least put the G20 at the table with the heads of the international organizations and talk about the huge decisions that actually have to be made. And if anyone says the word exceptionalism at that summit, they are immediately taken out of the room and said, told to go back to their hotel. So that's my pitch.
Thank you so much, David. I love that idea of the Survival Summit. And I suppose you could just mute people's microphones, right? if they say the word exceptionalism. I see a lot of really good questions showing up in the chat, and I'll invite the panelists either to respond as they're speaking or to answer, or at the end we'll have some time probably for additional question and answer. But let's drill down now into a couple of the institutions that we've been talking about. And first, I'd like to turn to the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court has been the subject of a reform expert review. And so maybe David and Sylvia, maybe Sylvia, will start with you. What is the state of international justice and the ICC? And are you able to express your views about the independent expert report insofar as you feel comfortable doing so? Thank you. Sylvia, maybe you can start us off.
Okay, thank you. It's good to go now into justice since we were talking about survival. And I think actually, I think even in the current very difficult environment that we are in, actually the state of international justice, I would say, is better that that you may think. Because first of all, I see there's still the support for the concept of accountability for core crimes has not diminished, although of course there is a need to address the gaps and flaws in the current system of international criminal justice. One of them, one major one, is the lack of universality of the ICC, which was created with a global aspiration, but it doesn't have yet universal participation. But at the same time, the concept itself, the support for the concept is there for accountability. And also, I already spoke about the thinking of multilateralism in terms of systems that enhance the global compact. I think such system is indeed emerging in the area of criminal justice because we see that there is a combination of efforts at multiple levels. The ICC continues to be the central piece of the scheme, but there are other international or hybrid criminal tribunals and mechanisms dealing with such crimes. Even the International Court of Justice is currently dealing with related matters in the current proceedings of Gambia versus Myanmar on the application of the Genocide Convention. Also, in addition to tribunals, we see mechanisms created to collect and preserve evidence for future international or national proceedings, which also shows that there is this requirement for justice that has not diminished. When there is no agreement for a tribunal, you preserve the evidence for the future. And we have two international mechanisms for Syria and Myanmar, for instance. And also we have national proceedings going on the basis of universal jurisdiction. The concept is now back, or other extraterritorial concepts. For instance, next week on the 27th of October, national proceedings against two mid-ranking officers of the Syrian regime will resume in Koblenz, Germany. So there is a lot of things going on that shows that now we are really see the emergence of a system of criminal justice. So the ICC, we know, is under attack. It is controversial. It has flaws, but there is also other things going on also at the ICC, and you mentioned these efforts to do some reform. There is this expert review that has been started, and there is a report now that we all have to study very, very carefully, which I think is great because the court has been undertaking reform since 2013. And I was part of these efforts while I was at the court, but as a judge and then as president. And lots of things were done. And lots of these things are being acknowledged and endorsed by the expert review. So I really hope that this expert review report, this effort will really accelerate the necessary reforms at the court, because of course we need reforms in all organs of the institution. So I wouldn't try to depict the rosy picture, but I think in the current environment, we should not be too pessimistic about the state of international justice.
Thank you so much. And maybe Ambassador Sheffer, you could follow up. And there is a question in the chat about that, maybe which is related, which says, how do we deal with threats to institutions that threaten their legitimacy, such as the US threat to the ICC? So that might be a related question that you could also respond to.
Sure, I'd love to. Let me just obviously once again embrace so much of what Sylvia has said to us. If I were grading the state of international criminal justice, I think I would give it a B as in Bemba. That's what I would give it, that grade, because there's so much that has been accomplished in the international tribunals that we need to recognize. And at the same time, there's still so much potential within them that needs to be nurtured, cultivated, projected, and that hasn't quite happened yet. And once I think we can achieve that, then the performance overall of the institutions relating to international criminal justice will shine forth even brighter than they have up to this date. We always have to recognize with international criminal justice two things. First, it's an extremely complex exercise in terms of the law and the practice of law. And secondly, it is the long game. It is not the short game. And so if one is expecting a result within a year or 2 years, you really will not get that. You will get it after many years. Now, I do think that there's always the challenge. Well, I don't know if there's always the challenge, but I would like there to be the challenge that we improve the trial work of the international tribunals, whether it be the International Criminal Court or the ad hoc ones, whereby the trial time itself can be as efficiently managed as possible within the shortest period of possible time, so that results can be achieved within a reasonable set of years, particularly from the perspective of the victims. And then secondly, that we have a formula developed within the international tribunals to deal with elderly defendants. Now, I know that sounds sort of odd, but it's a real thing. Sometimes arrests are not achieved until decades later. And this is true of the Yugoslav, of the Rwanda tribunals. And so these individuals are old. They have health problems. And I do think that the judicial process needs to be modified to deal with that reality so that justice can be achieved in their lifetimes, in the defendant's lifetimes. There has to be that practical recognition by judges and by prosecutors and by defense counsel of that necessity. So I just put that down on the table as something that has always kind of burdened my thinking about international justice over the decades. Now I want to talk about the independent expert review for a few minutes, Leila, if that is, I think that's okay, right? At this point, I can discuss that. And then answer the question from the audience member. The independent expert review, which believe me, I have not line read every line of its hundreds of pages. I don't know who has yet. But I have certainly given it a fair amount of time to look at, and I want to say something about it. It's impressive. I mean, it's a very impressive document by experts in international litigation, and what we sometimes call domestically, and I'm sure many law students are in classes where they talk about complex litigation. Well, this is complex litigation at the international level. And how do you sort of torque an international court to deal with complex litigation? Not simple, very complex on many levels, from investigation all of the way to judgment, and then to reparations. So this is not easy. And I think it's to the credit of the International Expert Review team led by Justice Goldstone of South Africa that they produced this document. It has a lot of very useful guidance for the chambers of judges, for the office of the prosecutor, and for the registry. And a lot of it is very dry stuff. It's very administrative in terms of how to reorganize certain functions within the court so that efficiency is the watchword. And that is very, very important. And I think the court will benefit from taking the review seriously so that, let's say, a year from now, 2 years from now, the court can represent itself as having achieved a new level of efficiency in its work. Actually, Sylvia, Judge Fernandez, while she was president of the court, started many of these processes within the court, particularly the issue of efficiency of the time it takes for a trial to be held. And so she should be recognized for having kind of really launched a lot of things that I think inspired the experts who look at the court, and I would hope would impress governments, not only the state party governments, but a lot of non-state party governments, that the court is taking the issue of efficiency very, very seriously and undertaking reforms that can then be praised, frankly, and recognized as the court growing, evolving, and not being, putting to shame, frankly, what the US State Department under Secretary Pompeo has accused it of over the last year, which is just outrageous rhetoric, quite frankly. Now, I do want to say, in terms of the recommendations of the expert review, there are just a couple that I want to make mention of. And one is, there's a recommendation, and I won't try to cite the paragraph, but there's a recommendation that the court should focus more on those with the most responsibility for atrocity crimes in a situation, that the court should have a higher level of gravity in the commission of the atrocity crime as its benchmark, and thus a narrower range of cases, frankly, coming to the court because of these sort of revised criteria of gravity and of most responsibility. Now, that means that the court would look even more at a high leadership level for prosecution. Now, I get it. I understand why the experts are saying that, because it does condense the caseload, it focuses it, and it provides more uniformity in how the judges approach each situation that they're reviewing and the cases that arise from them. But it does have a consequence, because on the one hand, some of the criticism of the court has been, well, you need to bring first lower level individuals into the spectrum of investigation and prosecution in order to get to the high level. You need them at the low level first to build your case. So I think this is going to be a challenge for the court to look at that recommendation and get it right. And secondly, it actually is going to trigger the need to develop more non-ICC tribunals to deal with a larger set of potential defendants in atrocity crime situations who will not rise to the focus of the court, but still need to be brought to justice, whether they be brought to justice ultimately in national criminal courts or in ad hoc tribunals that are created specially for a situation. Whether, I mean, a classic example is we're lacking that in Syria. So what are we doing? I think, as Sylvia pointed out, we're looking at Germany and the trial upcoming against 2 Syrian defendants under German national law exercising universal jurisdiction over those Syrian defendants. But I think that means that the future of international criminal justice becomes even more challenging and complex, because there has to be, or there should be, a judicial process for the vast number of potential defendants, because the ICC will focus on the top leadership. And Sylvia, Leila, I have just one more point, and then I'm going to be quiet. Under the recommendations, and this is emblazoned on my virtual wall here somewhere, is recommendation 356, which is in the Appendix A of the review. And it says that the Trust Fund for Victims, which is that part of the International Criminal Court that tries to address the needs of the victims of atrocities, which for which perpetrators have been brought to justice and deemed guilty, that the Trust Fund for Victims should develop as soon as possible a comprehensive and effective fundraising strategy. And in the detail of the report, it actually makes note of something that I know Sylvia is aware of, that has been percolating for a couple of years, which is to look more boldly at how could you raise funds that have to be voluntary. They're not assessed to states, in order to address the needs of the victims. And there's an explicit reference to work that has been focused on social bonds. So I think that is, and then frankly, that is an idea in terms of how do you finance international criminal justice, is a huge issue that is not resolved, that is very contentious, that holds back important investigative and other judicial work because of the limitation of funding. That issue has to be solved. Okay, Leila.
Wow, so much to think about there.
I didn't question, I'm sorry, the question from the audience.
Let's come back to that, because I want to let the WHO discussion come back in, and then we'll kind of pull together some of the legitimacy and a lot of the questions about superpowers and universality. So sort of the same question for you, Professor Burci. Your organization also, well, not yours, but the organization that you were part of for a very long time, the WHO, has really been front and center as we're all dealing with this global crisis. So how has the pandemic strengthened or weakened your institution, and where are we at now with WHO reform? Thank you so much.
Yeah, good question. I mean, this kind of crisis, in a way, amplifies the problems and the drawbacks and the positive sides, I would say. So I go back to my initial point of a mixed picture. On the positive side, again, I think that the US has found itself isolated in this rejection of WHO. That anyway, I guess you could question the motives for this blunt approach, withdrawal, sort of trashing it, considering it like an accomplice of China. Frankly, there were things that I don't think they have much substance. I think WHO has shown its value in a number of ways. It has created, after Ebola, the Ebola crisis a few years ago, it has created an emergency program, which is an operational program. And WHO has never been an emergency organization. So it had to create from scratch an operational capacity and literally put it on top of an institution that was fundamentally normative, policy setting, and so on. It's not an easy operation at all. But I think it did quite successfully with all its limitations. And I think it's proved its value. For example, sending a lot of supplies to developing countries. WHO has sent hundreds of thousands, actually, of diagnostic kits, of masks, of protective equipment to least developed countries, in particular in Africa. And that's something that would not have been possible even 5-6 years ago. That's something that you haven't seen much in the media, but I think it made a tremendous impact, including training in use of CPR, diagnostics, and so on. The second is the guidance, normative guidance. And that's something that escapes sort of normal categories of international law. That's really using aggressively the internet as a platform to give guidance of all types, guidance to governments, but even guidance to individuals. When friends of mine were asking me, so should we wear a mask or not? I would go to the website of WHO, the really individual guidance that speaks to us. And that's to me is something also that should not be taken for granted, because it defies the typical functionalist paradigm that international organizations are created by states and the interlocutors are only states. So that paradigm has gone out of the window a long time ago. And I think WHO shows it very well in reaching out directly to within the state, to individuals, to operators, to companies, to local authorities and so on. So obviously mistakes were made, but I think it's been done reasonably well considering how fast science has been moving. People that in a way criticized certain sort of maybe, I don't know, weak guidance of WHO on masks, on asymptomatic carriers, have to take into account the incredible speed and the uncertainty in science that must be the foundation of this kind of normative guidance by international organizations. Also, I would like to restate what I said before. Look what's happening in the last 2-3 months with different levels of success, arguably. But there is really a coming together of states, of public-private partnerships, of international organization, of the industry in coordinating clinical trials, in already planning for the distribution of therapeutics and vaccines. And this is something, again, goes way beyond states. Some of the actors have been multi-stakeholder, has been the Gates Foundation, has been, again, this private-public partnership that have a lot of money, like the Gavi Alliance and so on. And this is all centered around WHO. On the negative side, I would put the weakness of the international health regulations that, after all, are the normative instruments that is managed by WHO, that have been revised in a rush about 15 years ago, and they're showing some weaknesses. And they really have to be revised, to be reconsidered. But they embody, I think, a contemporary approach to risk management, the globalization of risk. The second is the funding, both in absolute terms, because the latest budget of WHO is about $5 billion, which is the budget of the hospital of Geneva. But also the funding model, highly reliant on voluntary contribution. So WHO has very little flexibility. It's a donor-driven organization. That's in a way the new flavor of multilateralism, that is basically subcontractors of individual donors, fragmenting accountability, making very difficult to have a real coherent approach to the real problems beyond COVID. And also WHO has been arguably the victim of geopolitical rivalry. So when you squeeze between China and the US in a zero-sum gain kind of environment, it's very difficult to sell your message. There's not much space for neutrality. Neutrality means being friendly with your enemy, with your adversary. And in this sense, I think that with all the criticism that has been leveled to him, that the current Director General has shown leadership, has not picked a fight, has stayed on message, has focused on the technical message, has focused on saving lives. And I think it is, going back to what Sylvia was saying about leadership, that to me was a good exercise of leadership. I think WHO and Dr. Tedros come out strengthened, all in all. There is currently obviously some appetite for further reforms. There are two big evaluations going on about the performance of the IHR, but also the bigger picture. Once these evaluations are finished, again, it goes back to leadership. Will there be the kind of more strategic long-term leadership in taking the outcome of this evaluation and really trying to make changes that have to do with WHO, but as I said before, well beyond WHO. Otherwise, we keep the status quo. We don't build back better, as the popular saying goes. And I think it would be a tragic missed opportunity.
Thank you so much. And I think that's answered a little bit some of the questions that are in the chat about funding. I'm not sure that we have an answer. We've certainly raised some of the problems. Our next question really was focusing on, and this also came up in the chat, we have now this rivalry, and Professor Burci, you spoke about it, between the great powers. We have some elements of non-cooperation and dysfunction in the Security Council, especially with respect to the pandemic, but also with respect to other issues. And at the same time, we have sort of a network effect where individuals from all over the world are trying to be involved in international law and institutions and solving problems. I think Ambassador Sheffer talked about how we had the age of this. We have the age of the network now, right? Here we are sitting. I'm sitting in my house in St. Louis, and there are people from 40 countries that are on this Zoom call. So address this a little bit. How are we going to deal with the tensions between these institutions? Professor Burci, you might talk about how Europe might cope with this. We've also had some questions about what about India? What about countries that maybe don't feel like they're really part of the conversation? Can you speak about that from your perspective? You've worked in many international institutions, and then Judge Fernandez, and then Ambassador Sheffer. So why don't you start us off there?
But very briefly, I think that we shouldn't exaggerate this sort of polarization. There is, but there is space for a lot of participation. We see sometimes things from the perspectives of the UN. But if you look, for example, for the perspectives of WHO, the organization I know better, the real leader sometimes is not the United States, is not China, is India, is Brazil, is South Africa. The BRICS have a tremendous power. Brazil has been leading on many issues, building alliances, moving the fight from WTO to WHO. There has been, I think, quite a lot of multilateral diplomacy that maybe sometimes goes beyond the radar screen of international lawyers because it seems highly technical, but it's actually highly political, and it touches on many areas of international governance and international law. So networking obviously has accentuated this, has opened the governance of international organizations to the media, to NGOs. Professor Sheffer said about communication. International organizations are notoriously bad communicators because they feel they cannot go beyond what the membership says. Membership is divided, so we err on the side of caution. But there is an attempt to rejuvenate this using aggressively Twitter, Instagram. So there is an attempt to speak for example, the language of young people. As you said, you need popular support. Popular support is not people like me that is retiring in 3 years. It's really the generation that need to be reached with social media and so on. There is quite a bit of delay, but there is also an attempt to catch up and motivate and reach out and speak the language of the people that will be the future of multilateralism in this sense.
Yeah, maybe you need a TikTok army supporting the international institution.
Or Snapchat.
Snapchat. Judge Fernandez, do you want to join the conversation on this question?
Thank you very much. Yes, and I would like to echo very much what Gianluca has said. I fully agree. I think we should not exaggerate polarization, and we should recognize that there is more diversity. So we should not simply rely on the leadership of one country, of the United States, or of only Western countries. We need to see that there is more of a diverse world where other countries are taking a role. And I think in the future there will be, we will have to get used to see more influence from maybe non-Western countries and maybe also non-liberal states. So I think we need to adapt to a more diverse world. I think we need to also recognize, and that's why we need to adapt and innovate, that is going to be probably because of this diversification, it's going to, and this more shared leadership in a way, it was going to be more difficult to find consensus or universal consensus around certain issues that may make treaty making more difficult, and we already see this at the UN. So maybe one possibility to go forward in certain issues is to go into these cross-regional alliances on issues that may be a good way forward. And actually, we've seen this already. For instance, with the ICC, it was a much more benign times, but actually it was the creation of a cross-regional alliance of mid-sized and small countries in partnership with NGOs that pushed this idea forward. So I think we're going to see a little bit more of that, and we need to see the opportunities and grab them, because I think there is this opportunity to go a little bit beyond just one side, or just maybe one of the criticism is that our legal order is too much based on liberal internationalism, based on too much on Western values. I think these cross-alliances, cross-regional alliances, may be also an opportunity to go into something that everybody will be believed to be more legitimate. But of course, it's going to be more difficult to find a worldwide consensus around certain issues. Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe a little bit of a bottom-up rather than a top-down perspective as well. So Ambassador Sheffer, and maybe as you answer the question, obviously we have an election coming up in less than 2 weeks. So maybe you can try to answer the question now and predicting the future a little bit if there is a change in US administration.
Yes, and again, I embrace so much of what Gian, Luca, and Sylvia just said. I do think that if we do not have a change in administration, and frankly, I just want to make this point. There is so much dialogue going on as if, shall we say, the dark side of our lives is going to just continue. And we have to deal with it. We have to figure out how to deal with this again. There's actually a fair amount of optimism in this country, I think, that maybe there will be a change. We don't want to be ignorant in predicting it, but things can change on that score pretty quickly, and that'll set a new agenda for next year that has a whole new conversation to it. But if we were to continue along this trajectory of US withdrawal from international organizations and institutions and courts, I do think it's important to recognize that there will still be a backstop in American society. And we need to recognize that and not forsake them as well. In other words, I won't surprise you with this. Obviously, there's the backstop of civil society. There's the backstop of a large portion of what may be the US Congress at next year. It could be two chambers of the same party with the president of another party. That too can change the dynamic in terms of our relationship with the rest of the world. But then I also want to say that I do think that if we are in that situation, I think corporate America is going to make an increasingly dynamic intervention in our governance, in how we project ourselves to the world, in what our value systems are. I don't think corporate America is just going to say, great, we can just abandon our values. Everything is isolationism. It's just profits. I don't think so anymore. There's a change afoot within corporate America, believe it or not. And so I do think there's kind of a backstop there, both in civil society and corporate America, that we need to recognize if the administration perpetuates into a second term. Now, if there were a change and there is a new administration, a Biden administration, then I think given all that he has represented in all of his position papers, et cetera, and also given his background as vice president during the Obama administration, and frankly, he is very much a foreign affairs player. He has been throughout his entire career. So the world is not foreign to him. And I do think that you are going to see a change. My only caution is that the United States government not make the mistake of charging back into the world with a presumption of leadership. I just don't think it should do that. Because I think the rest of the world has evolved a bit in the last 3 or 4 years in a very significant way. And Gian Luca made this point as well. And therefore, when we go back into the world, constructively, we do so as a collaborating party with other leading nations in the world to achieve collective decisions that, yes, advance US interests, but they don't have to always be advanced with the United States being seen as the leader in the world in achieving those objectives. I think we've reached the stage now where there has to be much more of a group effort. But man, would it make a difference to have the United States as a dynamic, constructive player at the table, as opposed to a destructive player.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. And I'm seeing in the chat, a lot of the students were very encouraged by what you said, David, earlier in your remarks. And I do want to point out, we do have networking rooms that are more like Zoom rooms where you can actually interact and talk to people. It's not the same as having a drink at the bar or hanging out in the corridors and over a cup of coffee, but we do have a lot of opportunities during the weekend for actually conversations that can take some of these themes and then go into the community rooms. Women in International Law is this afternoon, as well as several of the committees. And throughout the day tomorrow, we'll have those opportunities as well, because obviously there's so much to chew on here with this conversation. I think we have time for one more question if we're quick with it. And it was, how can international adjudication, whether it's civil or criminal, help create a more peaceful and cooperative world? And each of you have been involved in some way in various courts, either nationally or internationally or both. Mediation, conciliation. Gianluca, go ahead and start us off with the answer to that question.
Yeah, very quickly, and I go back to this COVID and all the havoc it's been wreaking. I think one of the problem is the lack, and I go back to what I said in response to your first question, is the lack of a mechanism, of a space to try to ensure an element of consultation or coordination and prevent disputes. Because the international health regulations have a dispute settlement system that has remained dead letter. Because what happens, in my view, in situations of crisis like this are two things. First, they are quick crises that need to be solved quickly. They don't lend themselves to years of arbitration or judicial settlement. They need informal, quick, practical mechanisms that at this point are not necessarily available. The second is the fear for the future, frankly. Again, with the economic devastation, but not only, also social devastation of COVID, some people foresee and are concerned about an avalanche of litigation down the line. Trade litigation, investment litigation, but also human rights litigation. Many people have just gone along with the draconian measures that have been imposed on us, but I think now you see the pushback. And with all the uncertainty in science, with all the margin of error that the states have, I wouldn't be surprised if down the line we have really a mass of cases to the Human Rights Committee, to the European Court of Human Rights, to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and so on. And then probably this will put some strain on this institution. Certainly the European Court is already sort of creaking under the weight of its docket. And if we have a mass of additional litigation, then we may have some systemic issue. So in terms of what we are living now with COVID, I would say the need for better system and better mechanism to nip disputes in the bud and try to sort them out quickly, versus a need to look and critically at what may happen down the line, because it would be perverse if you have an explosion of investment litigation against developing countries that have taken emergency measures that obviously impact the interests of their investors. That to me would be another nail in the coffin of the ISAS system and so on, but you can't exclude that.
And maybe David, just 1 minute, and then Judge Fernandez will give you the last word on this question. So hopefully they won't cut our microphones off exactly at 2:15. David?
Yes, I would say if one looks empirically at the record of the international criminal tribunals, Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Cambodia, Lebanon, East Timor, now Timor-Leste, of course, and even the International Criminal Court, while there'll be some dips in your curve, I think you will find that the end result of international criminal prosecution of perpetrators of atrocity crimes within those societies has the end result of achieving more peace and stability within those societies, and or shall we say contributing to that tremendously, than otherwise. That we're better off having had those prosecutions and those convictions than we would be otherwise. All of those societies are essentially stable societies now. Of course, tons of problems in all places of the world, but nonetheless, I think the empirical evidence is there to work with now to show the worth of the end result of international criminal prosecutions.
Thank you. And Judge Fernandez, you have the last word. Oh, except you're muted.
Already, I wasted my time. So, I agree with the previous speakers. I would like to say that yes, justice can prevent the violence, but I would like to say that justice is one prevention tool into a toolkit for prevention. In addition to justice, you also need to enshrine permanent policies and mechanisms in national agendas and multilateral agendas. We need to, of course, justice is one part of this toolkit, but we also need other things like education and mechanisms against the precursors of violence. We know them very well: racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and all forms of intolerance. They are on the rise and they need to be addressed before they escalate. I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for your amazing expertise and sharing that as we kick off this, this International Law Weekend 2020. We're now going to end this panel. Please join me in thanking the panelists. You can't hear people applaud, but I'm sure they actually are. I can't find my reaction button, or I would push an applause as well. And thank you so much. And please do join us for some or all of the rest of the weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That
Thank
ends
you very much.
Pleasure.